Have you ever wondered how far people who seem like a perfect match can go? He is a charismatic, confident man. She is a sweet and modest girl. But behind this seeming idol was a darkness that shocked even experienced investigators. The story of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homulka has become one of the most horrific pages in Canadian criminal history. What made them cross all the boundaries of humanity? It sounded too good to be true. In 1990, Carla became engaged to a handsome and experienced professional accountant from PricewaterhouseCoopers. He was wealthy, and their wedding was supposed to be magical. She adored Paul. He seemed unique and extraordinary to her, even in bed. Carla would do anything to keep him by her side. Absolutely anything. However, Paul was no ordinary guy. He had special requirements for his bride. He was obsessed with the fact that Carla was not a virgin. It seemed unfair to him. So Paul decided that Carla owed him something in return. What exactly? She had to give him the virginity of another young and beautiful girl, her own sister, Tammy. Whether Tammy agreed or not did not matter to Paul. He would receive his precious gift. But Carla was no ordinary girl either. She liked everything Paul offered, even his darkest fantasies. She willingly participated in their realization. For both of them, these were significant events worthy of being recorded on tape to relive the unforgettable moments over and over again. They say that strong marriages are made in heaven. But Carla and Paul's marriage was made in hell. Paul Bernardo was born into a family that, despite its financial stability, had a complex dynamic. His mother, Marilyn, came from a respectable family, but her life was heavily influenced by her father's control. Her first love did not receive his approval, and she eventually married Kenneth Bernardo. Kenneth came from a family where his father had built a profitable marble business. However, in his own home, Kenneth demonstrated a harsh and authoritarian character, which created constant tension in his relationship with Marilyn, who was increasingly withdrawn. Paul seemed like a happy child. He smiled often, was polite, and did well in school. However, as a teenager, he revealed some family secrets that caused deep internal conflicts. After graduation, Paul started working for a company with a unique corporate culture. He became interested in self-help literature and training seminars, which significantly shaped his views. During this time, he met Carla Homulka. Their relationship developed rapidly as Carla supported Paul in many of his endeavors. Carla Homulka was the eldest of 3 daughters born to Carol and Dorothy Laurie Homulka. She was born in 1970, and in 1975 her family settled in St. Catharines, Ontario. From a young age, Carla showed diverse interests and was an excellent student. While attending Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School, she was active in gymnastics, theater, and choir. She also ran a club aimed at preparing young women for a successful future. After graduating from high school in 1988, Carla worked as a veterinary assistant, demonstrating her love for animals. Her career began at a pet store in Thorold, and then she moved on to work at Martindale Veterinary Clinic. In October 1987, Carla met Paul Bernardo at a restaurant during a conference in Toronto. She was 17 at the time, and Paul was 23. They quickly developed a connection, and soon became engaged, marking the beginning of their relationship. The case of the Scarborough rapist. The police first noticed Paul Bernardo's involvement when he was known as the Scarborough rapist. Detective Constable Irwin of the Toronto Police Department was deeply involved in the investigation. Several victims reported the following details. The attacks took place in the evening, often at bus stops, and the attacker approached through them. He was described as rude but talkative during the attacks, seemingly looking for specific answers. Witnesses described the attacker as young, clean-shaven, with straight, well-maintained teeth, and wearing a pleasant-smelling cologne. The attacks mostly took place near the village of Guildwood in Scarborough, leading investigators to the village of Guildwood. Victim testimony and sketch. In December 1987, one of the victims provided a detailed description of the subject, a handsome man, approximately 6 feet tall, clean-shaven, and no tattoos. This led to the creation of a sketch that was supposed to capture the resemblance to Paul Bernardo. However, the sketch was not immediately released to the public. Jennifer Halligan, Bernardo's ex-girlfriend, reported his abusive behavior to the police, describing physical violence and threats. She noted his resemblance to the sketch and mentioned that he drove a white Capri, which is consistent with the car linked to the crimes. no immediate action was taken on these reports. On May 26, 1990, during the 11th attack, the victim, a 19-year-old woman, provided important details that helped police identify the suspect as the Scarborough rapist. 2 days later, the composite sketch was finally published in Toronto newspapers and local media, and a $150,000 reward was offered for information. By July 1990, more than 230 DNA samples had been collected for testing. 2 of them specifically identified Paula Bernardo as the suspect. In June, a bank employee billed a man resembling the sketch who was identified as Bernardo. Around the same time, other information came to light from Tina Smirnis, whose husband, Alex, was close to the second Bernardo. Alex says that Bernardo bragged that he had participated in a previous investigation in 1987, and often spoke openly about his private life in disturbing detail. However, Alex's testimony was deemed unconvincing, and investigators were hesitant to act. Eventually, after cross-referencing numerous cases, they interviewed Bernardo. On November 20, 1990, Detective Constable Irwin, not fitting the typical criminal profile, described him as intelligent, attractive, and family-oriented. Bernardo voluntarily provided DNA samples and admitted that he resembled a composite sketch. In hopes of his cooperation, investigators believed that a person as articulate and balanced as Bernardo could not have committed such heinous crimes. The police also considered a candidate, Alex Smirnis, whose awkward behavior and vague background checks raised doubts about his credibility. After narrowing the range of suspects to 5 people, DNA testing eventually included Bernardo. In April 1992, his samples were sent for reanalysis. However, by that time the Scarborough rapist had ceased his activities, and Bernardo seemed to have disappeared from the public eye. After the interrogation, Bernardo moved to another neighborhood, where he secretly met with a man who helped convince others that he was not who they thought he was. This marked a change in his life, and soon the series of incidents that had plagued the neighborhood came to an end. However, there were still disturbing events that were part of a larger series of disturbing events. In the spring of 1991, Bernard's life seemed to take on a darker color, after which he began to associate more with young people. He often manipulated situations for his own benefit. His behavior continued to escalate in the following months, involving different people and making them part of his harmful actions. Bernard's influence on others was evident, and there were several mistakes where he took advantage of his power and position. In one case, he manipulated a situation where a young woman was in a vulnerable position. The situation continued to escalate, and his environment began to notice disturbing patterns of behavior. He began to distance himself from his past life, hiding behind a new identity, and engage in increasingly harmful actions. By the early 1990s, Bernard's actions drew the attention of many, but his behavior went unnoticed by those closest to him. Meanwhile, people he influenced began to piece together the truth about his actions, and their lives were forever changed. In the early morning hours of June 15, 1991, Bernard drove through Burlington, halfway between Toronto and St. Catharines. There, he took up a strange hobby of license plate theft. While there, he spotted a young girl named Leslie Mahaffey returning home from a funeral. She was 14 years old, and the time was late. Her friend Chris had recently been in a car accident, and after the ceremony, a group of teenagers gathered in the woods to drink and console each other. Later, around 2 a.m., a few of Leslie's friends walked her home. However, the back door of her house was locked. She assured them that the front door was open and sent them home before realizing that she could not get inside. Why she didn't have a key is unclear. She then went to a phone booth to call a friend and ask if she could stay the night, but she refused. At about 2:30 a.m., Leslie assured her friend that she would return home and wake her mother to get inside. That's when Bernard approached her. He fired off that he was going to break into the neighboring house to relieve the tension. Then he offered her a cigarette, and after a brief exchange, he led her to his car. But instead of simply offering her a cigarette, he abruptly attacked her, forced her into the car, and drove her to a secluded location. Once there, Bernard and his accomplice Carla continued their violent actions. They subsequently tried to dispose of Leslie's body by dismembering it and covering it with cement. Later, the body was washed ashore and identified through dental records. On April 16, 1992, in the afternoon, the couple Bernardo and Homulka were in the neighborhood of Senkaterings, looking for a new victim. The streets were mostly empty, as school had just ended, and many students were on their way home. On this day, they spotted 15-year-old Kristen French hurrying home nearby. She was a student at a Catholic high school in the northern part of Poltava. The couple stopped near a Lutheran church. Homulka got out of the car, holding a map, and approached Kristen with a question that looked like a request for help. When the girl looked at the map, the attackers struck. They forced her into the car. Several bystanders witnessed the incident. Kristen walked to school every day, and her usual route took only 15 minutes. She usually returned home on time, so her parents became concerned when she did not arrive at the usual time. After Kristen went missing, her family immediately contacted the police. Within 24 hours, law enforcement officers found witnesses to the incident who confirmed the kidnapping. The police also found Kristen's shoes at the scene, which confirmed the seriousness of the situation. Over the next few days, during the Easter holidays, the perpetrators continued their malicious actions, causing the girl pain and suffering. The couple had no plans to let Kristen go, and even when she tried to resist, she faced more threats. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case was that the perpetrators had stalked their victims long before the actual abduction. Their actions became increasingly aggressive, and it became clear that their goal was to take Kristen's life. The victim's body was later found. On April 30th, 1992, her body was found in a remote area near a cemetery. This tragedy left a deep mark on society, as it became one of the most discussed cases in the media. All the details and testimonies were crucial for the investigation, and the case was categorized as a serious crime. Other possible crimes, in addition to the confirmed ones, include the involvement of Leslie Erin Mahaffey and Kristen French in the actions committed by Paul Bernardo and Carla Homulka. They were suspected of committing other horrific and terrifying crimes. Tammy's funeral, her parents left town, and Lori visited her grandparents in Sauzi. The family home remained empty. On January 12, 1991, according to a study by author Stephen Williams, Jane Doe, where he committed an act of violence against her under Carla's supervision. Bernardo then tied the girl up and drove her to a deserted road near Gibson Lake. Bernardo and Homulka called her the January Girl. On April 6, 1991, at 5:30 a.m., Bernardo tracked down and abducted the girl as she was walking to the rowing club before practice. She was 14 years old. The girl's attention was drawn to an unknown blonde woman who waved to her from a car, which made her approach. Bernardo seized the moment and dragged the girl into the bushes near the rowing club. There he attacked her, forcing her to take off all her clothes and wait for 5 minutes before he left. On July 28, 1991, Bernardo stalked Cindy Kirshen, who was 21 years old. He first spotted her on his way home from work. On August 9, 1991, he started stalking her again. This time she was saved by the fact that she decided to stay at her boyfriend's house. When her boyfriend spotted Paul Bernardo, he began to chase the perpetrator and wrote down his license plate number. The couple reported the incident to the police, and it turned out that a police officer visited Paul's house, where the same car was parked. However, the investigation ended there. On November 30th, 1991, Terry Anderson disappeared about 3 blocks from the parking lot from which Kristen French was later abducted. Terry, who was 14 years old, attended Lakeport High School, located near the school where Kristen French attended. Terry Anderson and Kristen French disappeared just 2 kilometers from each other. In April 1992, the police stated that they had no evidence to link the 2 cases. In May of the same year, the body of Terry Anderson was found in the water in Dalhousie with no signs of life. The coroner concluded that Terry died of drowning, probably under the influence of alcohol and drugs. This conclusion was controversial given the events surrounding the disappearances of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. During a search of Bernardo's home, police found newspaper clippings reporting on a sexual assault in Hawaii that occurred during Bernardo and Homolka's honeymoon. The presence of such articles, the similarity of the offender's handwriting, and the time frame of the crime led the police to believe that Bernardo was involved. Law enforcement agencies in both the United States and Canada considered Bernardo responsible for the crime, but the case was left unresolved due to jurisdictional issues and lack of extradition. In 1997, journalist Dirk Fink published a book called No Cline to Mercy, in which he provided evidence of Bernardo's involvement in the murder of Elizabeth Bain, who went missing on June 19, 1990. 3 weeks after the Scarborough suspect went into hiding, Elizabeth's car was found with a large bloodstain on the back seat. Robert Baltovich, Elizabeth's boyfriend, was charged with the crime, although he continued to maintain his innocence. Baltovich was convicted on March 31, 1992 of second-degree murder. However, his lawyer suggested that the real perpetrator was an unknown rapist from Scarborough. Baltovich was sentenced to 8 years of a life sentence before his conviction was overturned in 2004. On June 22, 2008, after a series of pretrial motions and the presentation of new evidence implicating Bernardo in the murder of Elizabeth Bain, Philip Kottinen told the court that there was no evidence linking Robert Baltovich to the crime and asked the jury to find him not guilty of second-degree murder. On March 29, 1992, Bernardo chased and videotaped Shauna Petrick from his car, following her to her parents' house. The Petrick sisters attempted to memorize his license plate number but misread it, leading to a delay in the investigation. On March 31st of the same year, Shauna Petrick reported the stalker to the police and gave the license plate number. However, this information was misused by the authorities and fell into the so-called black hole mentioned in Judge Archie Campbell's 1996 report, in which he criticized police mishandling of evidence. This report later influenced the way Canadian police handle data. In 2006, Bernardo confessed to assaulting a 14-year-old girl in 1987. For this attack, the police wrongfully imprisoned an innocent man, Anthony Hannemeyer. On June 25, 2008, the Ontario Court of Appeal overturned this conviction, exonerating Hannemeyer. Homulka and Bernardo were repeatedly questioned by police, including in connection with the Scarborough rapist investigation, the Tammy Lynn Homulka case, the prosecution of Cindy Kirschian, and the Petrick sisters case. On May 12, 1992, one of the officers filed a report, after which a sergeant constable had a brief interview with Bernardo. The officers concluded that Bernardo did not fit the description of a suspect, although he admitted to them that he had previously been questioned in connection with crimes in Scarborough and had blood, saliva, and hair samples taken for analysis. On May 15th, a task force called Green Ribbon was created to investigate the murders of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. Meanwhile, the criminal couple applied for a legal change of name from Bernardo and Homulka to Teal, which Bernardo borrowed from a character in the 1988 film The General Law, a serial killer. At the end of May, John Mottl, a friend of Bernardo's, also reported Paul to the police as a potential perpetrator. In December 1992, forensic scientists finally began testing Bernardo's DNA samples, which had been provided 3 years earlier. That same year, Paul began physically abusing Carla, which likely contributed to the cessation of their criminal activities. Eventually, on December 27, 1992, Bernardo severely beat Homulka with a flashlight, leaving bruises on her arms, legs, head, and face. On January 4, 1993, Carla claimed that she had been in an accident. Her colleagues found the story suspicious and contacted Carla's parents, who knew nothing about the alleged accident. Carla had to take her daughter to a safe place by force. But after that, she returned to Paul, as if something invisible was keeping her there. At first, it seemed that it was just fear of the abuser. But in fact, Carla had other motives. It turned out that she was the one who cleaned up after herself when she realized that the situation could become deadly. By the will of fate, her parents managed to get Carla out of the house, but she found shelter with a friend. What happened next? It turned out that her friend's husband was a police officer, which led to a shocking revelation of some details. After Paul was arrested and his suicide attempt failed, Carla went to her relatives in Brenton. It was there that she told them how Paul Bernardo was connected to the disappearance of many girls. After several investigations, fingerprinting, and police suspicions, they found disturbing footage of the atrocities committed by this man. But was Carla really a victim? Or was she an accomplice? The trial and the shocking evidence, from the final plea agreement to the conditions of his imprisonment, force us to ask deeper questions about what really happened. Later, in 1995, he was charged with a number of crimes, including 2 murders. Paul Bernardo was sentenced to life imprisonment, with no parole eligibility for 25 years. But even in prison, his story did not end. Homulka was examined by numerous psychiatrists, psychologists, and other psychiatric and forensic experts. As one of them said, she was a diagnostic enigma. Despite her ability to present herself very well in front of a crowd, during her imprisonment, she demonstrated a moral emptiness that was difficult, if not impossible, to explain. Carla's behavior in prison was quite controversial. In prison, Yulia Homulka had a relationship with Linda Verono, who was serving a sentence for a series of armed robberies. According to a Montreal newspaper, Verono, after being released, repeated her crime to get back into prison. Carla's letters to Verono were written in French on paper covered with kisses and hearts. They were the same letters that Homulka wrote to her ex-husband, the same childish love notes. Experts noted that her language was almost childlike. During a psychiatric evaluation in 2000, Homulka told psychiatrist Robin Mensah that she did not consider her relationship with Verono to be homosexual, as Verono considered himself a man and was planning a sex reassignment operation, as mentioned in his report by psychiatric expert Louis Maurice. Homulka was ashamed of this relationship and hid it from her parents and the experts who examined her. The psychiatrist noted in his report that under the circumstances, the relationship was not abnormal. Other experts also noticed how different Homulka seemed to people. Her former colleague at the veterinary clinic and friend Wendy Lucen commented to the Toronto Sun that she now believes Homulka was a psychopath, not a frightened woman under pressure from an abusive husband. According to Lucen, Homulka promised to explain everything. But despite numerous letters while awaiting Bernardo's trial, and after testifying in court, she never explained why she did what she did. On January 11, 2008, the Canadian press reported that the letters written by Homulka to Wendy Lucen were taken off the eBay auction, where they reached a price of $1,600 by the end of the week. Before the auction ended, Lucen said she no longer wanted them. In a letter of apology to her family, Carla continued to blame Bernardo for all her crimes, claiming that he wanted her to steal sleeping pills from work and threatened her with physical and emotional violence when she refused. "I tried so hard to save her," Carla wrote. On the other hand, Tim Denson, a lawyer for the victims' families, noted that Homulka never apologized to the families of these victims. The forensic literature highlights the difficulties associated with studying the behavior of women suspected of having psychopathic traits. The various masks displayed by female psychopathic killers often reflect manipulation aimed at presenting the accused in a more favorable light. Dr. Graham Glancy, a forensic psychiatrist hired by Bernardo's lawyer, John Rosen, proposed an alternative theory to explain Homulka's behavior. As noted in the book The Invisible Jackness, Homulka was a prime example of a person with hybridophilia, a person who is sexually aroused by a partner's violent sexual behavior. Stephen Williams, who wrote In the Balance, later changed his mind about Carla when he began to correspond with her. This correspondence formed the basis of his second book, The Carla Effect. In her letters, Homulka spoke dismissively of the specialists who examined her and stated that she did not care what conditions she would be in until her release. She was ready to stand on her head for 3 hours every day if necessary. In other words, she was ready to say or do anything to gain her freedom. Homulka participated in all the treatment programs recommended by the prison administration, until she was offered to participate in a program designed for men who had committed sexual offenses. Carla refused, stating that she was neither a man nor a convicted sex offender. During the hearing on Homulka's release, under Article 810(2) of the Criminal Code, Morizet stated that Homulka, who was 35 at the time, did not pose a threat to society, although this caused considerable controversy among experts and interested observers of the case. As Homulka's release date approached, media speculation began to emerge about where she would settle. Some rumors claimed that she was planning to move to Alberta, which angered local residents. Other sources reported that she was going to travel to the United States using fake documents. Still others speculated that she might move to Quebec, where her case has not received as much publicity due to a court ban on coverage. Meanwhile, the relatives of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French asked the court to impose additional sanctions on Homulka, including electronic monitoring or mandatory annual examinations by a psychologist and psychiatrist. In June 2005, the Court ruled that Carla Homulka would remain a threat to society after her release. Therefore, on July 4th of the same year, additional restrictions were imposed on her under Article 810, Paragraph 2 of the Criminal Code. She was obliged to notify the police of her home address, place of work, and persons with whom she lived, as well as any changes in these data. If she planned to leave her home for more than 48 hours, she had to notify the police 72 hours in advance. She was prohibited from contacting Paul Bernardo, the families of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, the family of the victim known as Jane Doe, or any other violent offenders. She was also prohibited from communicating with anyone under the age of 16, taking prescription drugs, and violating the terms of therapy and counseling. In addition, she had to provide a DNA sample to the police. Violation of any of these conditions could have resulted in 2 years in prison. These restrictions seemed to be designed to protect her from angry people, because before her release, she began receiving threatening letters, which, I must say, was quite understandable. On July 4, 2005, Carla Homulka was officially released. The house she shared with Bernardo was demolished in 1998. While there is no doubt about Paul Bernardo's psychopathic nature, Homulka's role raises questions. She was able to hide incriminating recordings, shift the blame to her perverted husband, and create a victim image that she skillfully exploited. Fortunately, the truth eventually came to light. The only conclusion that can be drawn from this case is that crime has no gender, because crime is always crime.